The lights of Nexus Station Varelen never dimmed, and the massive structure floated in the darkness of space like a city that refused to sleep, surrounded by thousands of ships from 100 different worlds that had gathered here to maintain a fragile peace among the stars. Commander Vathra Kolsen stood at her post outside the diplomatic chambers, her forearms crossed in the traditional stance of vigilance, her armored exoskeleton gleaming under the station's artificial light. She was Thracian, a proud member of a species that had built their entire civilization around the concepts of honor, duty, and strength. Her compound eyes scanned every shadow, every movement, every breath that passed through the corridor. For 12 cycles, she had served as a guardian of the Concord, protecting diplomats and ambassadors from threats both seen and unseen. Her record was flawless, her reputation legendary. Other species whispered her name with respect and fear, for Vathra Kolsen had never failed in her duty. But today would change everything. The attack came without warning, swift and silent like death itself. A figure emerged from the crowd of diplomats, moving with unnatural speed toward Ambassador Thesson, the Villani representative whose trade negotiations had angered powerful interests across 3 star systems. Vathra saw the weapon in the assassin's hand, a small device that hummed with lethal energy. She did not hesitate, not even for a single heartbeat. Vathra threw herself between the assassin and the ambassador, her body becoming a shield of chitin and honor. The weapon discharged, and something cold and terrible entered her body, spreading through her nervous system like ice water flooding her veins. She crashed to the floor, her legs refusing to obey her commands, one of her arms hanging limp and useless at her side. The assassin fled into the chaos, but Vathra barely noticed. All she could feel was the absence of sensation, the horrifying silence where her body used to speak to her. She tried to stand, commanding her legs to move, but they had become strangers to her, dead weight attached to a warrior who could no longer fight. Security forces swarmed the corridor within minutes, and medical teams arrived shortly after. They lifted Vathra onto a hovering stretcher and carried her to the station's medical ward, where doctors of 6 different species examined her with scanners and probes and expressions of grave concern. The neurotoxin has severed the connection between her brain and her lower extremities, a Morvathi physician announced, his gray skin rippling with the colors of clinical detachment. The damage to her left secondary arm is equally severe. Regeneration is theoretically possible, but practically unlikely. The procedure would require resources and techniques that we cannot justify for a single patient. Vathra listened to these words from her bed, her remaining functional arms gripping the sheets with desperate strength. She wanted to scream, to fight, to do something other than lie there like a piece of broken machinery. But what could she do when her own body had betrayed her? The worst moment came 3 hours later when her honor guard arrived. Captain Thyros Velken, her second-in-command and a warrior she had trained herself, entered the medical ward with 12 soldiers in his back. Vathra felt a surge of hope at the sight of them, her brothers and sisters in arms who had fought beside her through countless battles. But Thyros did not meet her eyes. "Commander Vathra Kolsen," he announced in a voice that held no warmth, no recognition, no mercy. "By the ancient laws of our people, you have become Kith Voray, one who is already dead. A warrior who cannot fight is no warrior at all. Your name will be struck from our records, your achievements forgotten, your existence erased from the memory of the Thracian people." "Thyros," Vathra whispered, her voice cracking with disbelief. "We have served together for 8 cycles. You cannot simply abandon me here." But Thyros showed no reaction to her words, as if she had not spoken at all, as if she had already ceased to exist. He turned his back to her and marched toward the door, and the 12 soldiers followed without a single glance in her direction. The door closed behind them with a soft hiss, and Vathra was alone. Other species came and went over the following days, but none offered help or comfort. A Vellani healer entered her room by accident, saw her lying there, and immediately retreated with expressions of disgust painted across her delicate features. "Contamination," the Vellani muttered as she fled. "Spiritual contamination. The broken must not be touched." A Morvathi administrator visited to discuss her case, speaking about her as if she were a problem to be solved rather than a person to be helped. "We have calculated the cost of your continued treatment against the potential benefits," the administrator explained with cold efficiency. "The numbers do not favor intervention. We recommend transfer to a terminal dignity facility where you can expire with minimal resource expenditure." "I am not dying," Baithra growled through clenched mandibles. "I am injured, not terminal. From a practical standpoint, the distinction is irrelevant," the Morvathi replied before departing. Even the station's medical AI, a supposedly neutral intelligence designed to serve all species equally, had abandoned hope. "Patient Vaithra Kolsen," the AI announced during its daily assessment. "Prognosis: permanent disability. Recommended course of action: acceptance of condition and transition to end-of-life care. Would you like me to schedule a consultation with our dignity termination specialists?" "No," Vaithra snarled. "I would like you to leave me alone." The AI complied, and silence filled the room once more. Days passed, each one longer than the last. Vaithra stared at the ceiling of her medical ward, watching shadows move across the white surface as the station's artificial day cycled into artificial night. She had been a champion, a protector, a warrior whose name had inspired fear in her enemies and pride in her allies. Now she was nothing, less than nothing, a ghost that everyone could see but no one would acknowledge. She thought about giving up, about accepting the fate that the galaxy had chosen for her. Perhaps the ancient laws were right. Perhaps a warrior who could not fight truly was already dead. Perhaps she should simply close her eyes and let the darkness take her. But something inside her refused to surrender, a small flame of defiance that burned in the depths of her spirit. She was Vaithra Kolsen, and she had never lost a battle. She would not lose this one either, even if she had to fight it alone. She did not know that help was coming, walking toward her room on two human legs, carried by a heart that refused to accept the cruelty of the stars. Sergeant Marcus Cole had seen many things during his 12 years of service in Earth's interstellar defense corps, but he had never seen anything quite like the scene unfolding before his eyes. He was walking through the medical ward on a routine patrol, checking corridors and doorways as part of his security duties, when he noticed the Thracian honor guard marching past him with rigid precision. He recognized their uniforms and their species, but something about their formation seemed wrong, incomplete, as if a piece was missing from a puzzle. Then he saw her through the window of a medical room, lying alone on a bed that seemed far too large for her broken body. Marcus stopped walking and simply stared. He watched as a Vellani healer fled from the room with fear in her eyes. He watched as a Morvathi administrator spoke cold words and departed without compassion. He watched as the hours passed and no one came to offer help or hope. Something twisted in his chest, a feeling that he could not ignore no matter how hard he tried. "That is not your concern, Sergeant," his commanding officer said when Marcus reported what he had seen. Captain Una Okonkwo was a tall woman with keen eyes and a reputation for strict adherence to diplomatic protocols. "The Thracians have their customs and we must respect them. Interference could cause an incident that Earth cannot afford." "With respect, Captain, she is dying in there," Marcus replied. "Not from her injuries, but from neglect. Someone has to do something." "That someone will not be you," Okonkwo said firmly. "That is an order, Sergeant." Marcus saluted and left his captain's office, but his feet carried him back to the medical ward instead of to his quarters. He stood outside Vaithra's room for a long moment, thinking about orders and duty and the meaning of both. Then he pushed open the door and walked inside. Vathra's compound eyes fixed on him immediately, filled with suspicion and confusion. She had never seen a human up close before, and she did not understand why one would enter her room. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice rough from days of disuse. "What do you want?" Marcus pulled a chair from the corner of the room and sat down beside her bed. He looked at her with steady brown eyes that held no pity, no disgust, and no fear. "My name is Marcus Cole," he said simply. "I am a combat medic with the Terran Diplomatic Security Team, and I am not leaving." "I did not ask you to stay," Vathra growled. "I do not need your charity, human. Go away and leave me to my fate." "No," Marcus replied. The single word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Vathra stared at him as if he had spoken in a language she could not understand. "No?" she repeated. "What do you mean, no? I am ordering you to leave." "You are not in my chain of command," Marcus said, with a slight smile. "And even if you were, I would still say no. Where I come from, we do not abandon injured people just because someone decided they are not worth saving." Vathra did not know how to respond to this strange creature who refused to obey the unwritten rules of the galaxy. She turned her head away from him and stared at the wall, hoping that her silence would drive him away. It did not. Marcus returned the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. He brought food that he had researched carefully to ensure it would be compatible with Narration biology. He brought datapads loaded with information about neural regeneration and physical therapy. He brought conversation, talking to Vathra about his home planet, his family, his reasons for joining the service. "You are wasting your time," Vathra told him after the 5th day. "I am HFY, already dead in the eyes of my people. Nothing you do can change that." "Then your people are wrong," Marcus replied without hesitation. "I have seen your medical scans. Your brain is intact, your organs are functional, your will to live is obvious. The only thing broken is a neural pathway, and pathways can be repaired." "You do not understand," Vathra said bitterly. "Even if my body could be healed, I would still be HFY. I would still be nothing." Marcus leaned forward in his chair, his eyes burning with an intensity that made Vathra uncomfortable. "Let me tell you something about humans," he said quietly. 300 years ago, on my world, we had machines that could kill 1,000 people in a single instant. We had weapons that could poison the air and water for generations. We stood at the edge of extinction, looking down into the darkness, and we had every reason to give up. "But you did not," Vathra whispered, finding herself drawn into his words despite her resistance. "No, we did not," Marcus confirmed. "We chose to believe that tomorrow could be better than today. We chose to fight for every single life, even the ones that seemed impossible to save. We made that choice not because it was easy, but because it was right." He reached out and placed his hand on her arm, a gesture of connection that transcended the boundaries between their species. "I am making that choice now," he said. "I choose to believe that you can be healed. I choose to fight for your life. And I will keep fighting until you give me a reason to stop." Vathra felt something shift inside her chest, a crack forming in the wall of despair that she had built around her heart. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. Not her commanders, not her soldiers, not even her own family. This human, this strange and stubborn creature from a small blue planet on the edge of the galaxy, had looked at her broken body and seen something worth saving. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why do you care what happens to me? You do not know me. You owe me nothing." Marcus smiled, and there was warmth in that smile, warmth that Vathra had never expected to feel again. "Because that is what humans do," he answered. "We care about people, even when it makes no sense. We fight for strangers, even when no one asks us to. We believe in hope, even when hope seems impossible." He squeezed her arm gently before releasing it. "Now, let us talk about how we are going to get you back on your feet," he said. "I have been reading about Thracian neurology, and I think I may have found something interesting." For the first time since the attack, Vaithra Coulson felt a flicker of hope ignite in her soul. Marcus spent every free moment searching through medical databases, research papers, and experimental treatment records from a dozen different species. He read until his eyes burned and his head ached, driven by a determination that refused to accept defeat. After 2 weeks of relentless research, he found something that made his heart race with excitement and fear in equal measure. "Neural bridging," he announced to Vaithra during one of his daily visits. "It is an experimental technique developed by the Dasari, a species known for their advanced understanding of neurological systems. The basic concept is simple. Thracian neural pathways can regenerate, but they need a template to follow, a living guide that shows them how to reconnect." Vaithra listened with growing interest, her compound eyes fixed on the datapad that Marcus held before her. "The problem," Marcus continued, "is that the template must come from another living being. Someone has to be surgically connected to your nervous system for several weeks, sharing your sensory input, experiencing your pain, and serving as a bridge while your pathways rebuild themselves." "That sounds extremely dangerous," Vaithra observed. "Who would volunteer for such a procedure?" Marcus was silent for a long moment, and Vaithra suddenly understood what he was not saying. "No," she said firmly. "Absolutely not. I forbid it." "You cannot forbid me from making my own choices," Marcus replied calmly. "I have already consulted with a Dasari surgeon who operates a private clinic on the lower levels of the station. She believes the procedure is possible, though she admits the risks are significant." "Significant?" Vaithra laughed bitterly. "Human and Thracian biology are barely compatible. The pain transfer alone could destroy your mind. You could suffer permanent nerve damage, psychological trauma, or worse. I will not allow you to sacrifice yourself for me." "It is not your decision to make," Marcus said with quiet stubbornness. "I understand the risks, and I accept them. You saved Ambassador Theson's life when you threw yourself in front of that weapon. You were willing to die for a stranger. How can I do any less?" Vaithra wanted to argue, wanted to scream, wanted to shake some sense into this foolish human who seemed determined to throw away his life for someone he barely knew. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw something that silenced her protests. She saw the same fire that had burned in her own heart before the attack, the same unshakable commitment to duty and honor that had defined her entire existence. Marcus Cole was not acting out of pity or charity. He was acting out of conviction, out of a belief that some things were worth fighting for, regardless of the cost. "Your captain will never approve this," Vaithra said weakly, grasping for any argument that might change his mind. "I know," Marcus admitted. "That is why I am not going to ask for her approval." 2 days later, Marcus stood at attention in Captain Okonkwo's office, his face set in an expression of calm determination. "You want to do what?" Okonkwo demanded, her voice rising with disbelief. "Sergeant Cole, have you completely lost your mind? This is not just insubordination. This is diplomatic suicide. If something goes wrong, if you die during this procedure, Earth will face questions we cannot answer." "I understand, Captain," Marcus replied. "That is why I am submitting my resignation, effective immediately." Okonkwo stared at him as if he had grown a second head. "Your resignation?" She repeated. "You would throw away 12 years of service, your career, your future, all for an alien who refuses to acknowledge your existence." "She acknowledges me," Marcus said quietly. "That is enough." He placed his resignation letter on her desk and turned to walk out of the office. "Marcus," Okonkwo called after him, her voice softer than before. "Wait." He stopped but did not turn around. "You are making a mistake," she said. "But I can see that nothing I say will change your mind. Just promise me one thing." "What is that, Captain?" "Come back alive," she whispered. "That is an order." Marcus smiled slightly as he left the office, carrying his discharge papers and his hope for the future. The surgery took place in a small clinic, hidden in the depths of Nexus Station, far from the eyes of those who might object to such an unconventional procedure. Dr. Thiessen Valmora, a Thesari surgeon with scales of deep blue and eyes that held centuries of knowledge, prepared the operating room with meticulous care. "You understand what you are agreeing to," she said to Marcus as he lay on the surgical table. "Once I connect your nervous system to hers, you will experience everything she experiences. Her pain will become your pain. Her memories may bleed into your consciousness. The connection will be intimate in ways that most species find deeply uncomfortable." "I understand," Marcus confirmed. "Begin the procedure." The surgery lasted 14 hours, and when it was complete, Marcus and Vaethra were bound together by a web of neural filaments that glowed faintly beneath their skin. They lay in adjacent beds, their bodies separated, but their minds intertwined in ways that neither of them fully understood. The first week was agony. Marcus felt Vaethra's paralysis as if it were his own, a horrible absence of sensation that made him want to scream. He experienced her phantom limbs, the ghost of movement in legs that could no longer move. He tasted her despair, her shame, her rage at a universe that had stripped away everything she had valued. But he also felt something else, something that grew stronger with each passing day. He felt her will to survive, burning like a star in the darkness of her soul. He felt her courage, her honor, her unbreakable spirit that refused to surrender even when surrender seemed like the only option. He felt the person behind the warrior, the hopes and dreams and fears that she had hidden behind her armor of duty and discipline. And slowly and possibly, he felt the neural pathways beginning to rebuild. "It is working," Dr. Valmora announced during the third week of the procedure. "Her nervous system is following the template you are providing. The connections are reforming, stronger than before." Vaethra wept when she heard those words, tears streaming from compound eyes that had forgotten how to cry. She reached across the space between their beds and took Marcus's hand in her own, squeezing with a strength that surprised them both. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for believing in me when no one else would." Marcus squeezed back, his body trembling with exhaustion but his spirit burning brighter than ever. "We are not finished yet," he said through cracked lips. "Save your thanks for when you were standing on your own 2 feet." And so they continued to fight together, human and Narration, bound by pain and hope and something that might have been called friendship. 42 days after the surgery began, Vaethra Kolsen took her first steps. They were small steps, hesitant and uncertain, supported by a frame that Dr. Valmora had constructed specifically for Narration physiology. Vaethra's legs trembled with the effort, her muscles weak from weeks of disuse, her nervous system still learning to process the signals that flowed from brain to limb. But she was standing. She was walking. She was alive in ways that she had never expected to be again. Marcus watched from his bed, too weak to stand himself, but too proud to look away. The neural bridging procedure had taken a terrible toll on his body. His hands shook constantly, and strange jolts of pain sometimes shot through his legs without warning. Dr. Valmora had warned him that some of the nerve damage might be permanent, that he would carry the scars of this sacrifice for the rest of his life. He did not regret a single moment of it. "Look at you," he said with a grin that stretched across his exhausted face. "Walking around like you own the place. I told you we could do this." Vaethra turned to look at him, and her compound eyes glistened with emotions that she could not put into words. She released her grip on the walking frame and crossed the room on unsteady legs, each step a victory against impossible odds. When she reached his bedside, she lowered herself to one knee and bowed her head. "Marcus Cole," she said, in a voice that rang with ancient formality, "you have given me back my life. You have shown me that honor is not found in laws or traditions, but in the courage to do what is right. I owe you a debt that can never be repaid." "You do not owe me anything," Marcus protested, embarrassed by the intensity of her gratitude. "I just did what anyone should have done." "No," Vathra replied firmly. "You did what no one else would do. That is the difference between ordinary kindness and true honor." Word of Vathra's recovery spread through Nexus Station like fire through dry grass. Species that had ignored her existence now whispered about the miracle that had taken place in the hidden clinic. Some spoke with amazement, others with suspicion, and a few with something that might have been shame. The Thracian ambassador arrived 3 days later. Ambassador Corvith Colthan was an imposing figure, tall even by Thracian standards, with armor that gleamed with the symbols of his rank and authority. He entered Dr. Valmora's clinic with a squad of guards at his back and fury burning in his compound eyes. "Where is the human who has defiled our sacred traditions?" he demanded. "Where is the creature who dared to interfere with the natural order of Kethfore?" "I am here," Marcus said, pushing himself up from his bed with tremendous effort. He stood on shaking legs, supported by a cane that Dr. Valmora had provided. But he stood. "And I have defiled nothing." "You have committed an offense against our entire species," Corvith snarled. "Vathra Colsen was dead according to our laws. By saving her, you have violated the fundamental principles of Thracian culture." "Your laws were wrong," Marcus replied calmly. "She was not dead. She was injured, and she needed help. I helped her. If that is a crime, then I plead guilty." Corvith stepped forward, his massive form towering over the human who had dared to challenge millennia of tradition. His guards raised their weapons, ready to strike down the insolent Terran at their ambassador's command. "Wait!" The single word cut through the tension like a blade, and everyone turned to see Vathra walking toward them. She moved without the assistance of her frame now, her stride growing stronger and more confident with each step. Her posture was straight, her bearing proud, her eyes burning with a fire that none of them had ever seen before. "Ambassador Corvith," she said, her voice ringing with authority, "I invoke the ancient right of Kol Shevern." A collective gasp rose from the Thracian guards. Even Corvith seemed taken aback by her words, his mandibles clicking with surprise and confusion. "Kol Shevern?" he repeated. "The dead of breath? That right has not been invoked in over 2,000 cycles." "Then it is long overdue," Vathra replied. "By the laws of our ancestors, any being who returns life to one who has been lost may be claimed as bonded kin, equal in honor and status to any Thracian. Marcus Cole returned my life to me. I claim him as my brother in spirit, my equal in honor, and my kin until the stars themselves grow cold." Corvith's face contorted with conflicting emotions. The right of Kol Shevern was ancient, far older than the laws of Kethfore, and it could not be denied without bringing dishonor upon the entire Thracian government. "This is unprecedented," he growled. "A human has never been granted such status." "Then let this be the first time," Vathra said. "Your laws declared me dead, Ambassador." This human disagreed. And he was right. She moved to stand beside Marcus, placing one of her forearms around his shoulders in a gesture of solidarity and protection. "If you wish to punish him, you must punish me as well," she declared. "We are bound now, he and I. His honor is my honor. His life is my life. Attack one of us, and you attack us both." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. Corvith stared at the human and the Thracian standing together, and something shifted in his expression. Perhaps he saw the courage in their stance, Or perhaps he simply recognized that he had been outmaneuvered by laws older than his authority. "Very well," he said finally, his voice tight with reluctant acceptance. "The right of Cole Chevron is recognized. Marcus Cole is hereby acknowledged as bonded kin to Vithra Colsen, with all the rights and privileges that status entails." He turned and marched out of the clinic without another word, his guards following in stunned silence. When they were gone, Vithra turned to Marcus with a smile that transformed her alien features into something almost beautiful. "Welcome to the family," she said. "I hope you know what you have gotten yourself into." Marcus laughed, the first genuine laugh he had managed in weeks. "I have absolutely no idea," he admitted. "But I cannot wait to find out." Outside the clinic, in the corridors and chambers of Nexus Station, the news of what had happened began to spread. Young Thracians whispered about the human who had challenged their ancient laws and won. A Villani healer quietly approached Dr. Valmora to ask about human medical philosophy. A Morvathi administrator began to question the calculations that had dismissed Vathra's life as worthless. Something was changing in the galaxy, and it had started with a single act of stubborn, impossible, beautiful human compassion. 6 months had passed since Vithra Colsen took her first steps, and the galaxy had not stopped talking about what had happened on Nexus Station. The story had spread from system to system, carried by traders and diplomats and ordinary travelers, who could not help but share the tale of the human who had defied ancient laws to save a stranger. Some told the story as a warning about human interference in the affairs of other species. Others told it as a miracle, a sign that the cold darkness between the stars might contain more warmth than anyone had dared to believe. The Galactic Concord had finally decided to address what they called the Terran incident in a formal session of the full assembly. Representatives from over 60 species gathered in the Great Chamber, a massive auditorium at the heart of Nexus Station, where the most important decisions in galactic history had been made. The room hummed with tension and anticipation as diplomats took their seats and prepared for what promised to be a contentious debate. Many species wanted to censure humanity for cultural interference. The Thracian delegation had demanded formal sanctions. The Villani had proposed restrictions on human medical personnel operating outside their own territories. Even some neutral parties argued that humanity had set a dangerous precedent by ignoring the traditions of other civilizations. But before any of these motions could be brought to a vote, something unexpected happened. The doors of the Great Chamber opened and Vithra Colsen walked in. She moved with confidence and grace, her stride steady and strong, her posture radiating the honor of a warrior who had faced death and emerged victorious. The assembly fell silent as she approached the speaker's podium, every eye fixed on the Thracian who had been declared dead by her own people. "Honored representatives of the Galactic Concord," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the massive chamber. "I stand before you today as proof that the impossible can become possible when someone is brave enough to try." She paused, letting her words sink into the minds of her audience. "For 1,000 generations, our species have lived among the stars with walls between us. We have created laws and traditions that teach us to mind our own business, to avoid interference in the affairs of others, to let suffering continue when intervention might be inconvenient. We have called this wisdom, but it is not wisdom. It is cowardice." Murmurs rippled through the assembly, voices raised in protest and agreement alike. "I know this because I lived it," Vithra continued. "When I fell, when my body failed me, my own people abandoned me. Species that I have protected for years turned their backs rather than offer a helping hand. I was left to die alone, not because help was impossible, but because helping me would have required someone to break the rules." She turned to gesture toward the human section of the assembly, where Marcus Cole sat in a wheelchair beside Captain Okonkwo, who had successfully argued for his reinstatement with full honors. And then came Marcus Cole, Vathra said, a human who knew nothing of our laws, our traditions, or our reasons for abandoning those who fall. He saw a person in need, and he refused to walk away. He sacrificed his career, his health, and nearly his life to save someone he had never met. And when I asked him why, do you know what he told me? She paused again, and the silence in the great chamber was absolute. He told me that where he comes from, they do not give up on people. He told me that humans believe in hope, even when hope seems impossible. He told me that some things are worth fighting for, regardless of the cost. Vathra reached into a pouch at her side and produced a data crystal that glowed with soft blue light. I come before you today not to defend what Marcus Cole did, but to build upon it. I am proposing a new framework for medical intervention across the galactic concord, a doctrine that transcends cultural prohibitions when a sentient being's life is at stake. She inserted the crystal into the podium's interface, and the text of her proposal appeared on screens throughout the chamber. I call it the Cole Doctrine, she announced, named after the human who proved that compassion is stronger than tradition. The debate that followed lasted 11 hours. Representatives argued about sovereignty and interference, about ancient rights and modern responsibilities. Some species clung to their isolation with desperate fervor, insisting that the Cole Doctrine would open the door to cultural destruction. Others embraced the proposal with enthusiasm, seeing in it a chance to build something better than the cold darkness that had defined galactic civilization for so long. Marcus sat in his wheelchair throughout the debate, listening to species argue about principles he had never considered when he walked into Vathra's medical room. He had not been trying to change the galaxy. He had just been trying to help one person who needed him. But that was the thing about compassion, he realized as the hours passed. It did not stay contained. It spread from person to person, from species to species, from world to world. One act of kindness could inspire 1,000 more, and those 1,000 could inspire millions. The vote came at last, and the assembly fell silent as the results were tallied. For a long moment, no one breathed. And then the numbers appeared on every screen in the chamber. The Cole Doctrine had passed by a single vote. The great chamber erupted in chaos, voices raised in celebration and protest, but Marcus barely heard any of it. He was looking at Vathra, who had turned from the podium to meet his eyes across the crowded room. She raised one of her forearms in salute, a gesture of honor and gratitude that transcended the boundaries between their species. Captain Okonkwo leaned over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Was it worth it?" she asked quietly. "The pain, the sacrifice, the nerve damage you will carry for the rest of your life? Was it worth all of that?" Marcus watched as young diplomats from a dozen species gathered around Vathra, asking questions about the doctrine, about human medical philosophy, about the possibility of building a warmer galaxy. He saw hope in their eyes, hope that had not been there 6 months ago. "Every time," he said. "It was worth it every single time." Years later, medical stations across the galaxy began displaying a simple human phrase above their doors, translated into 100 languages so that every species could understand its meaning. The words had come from Earth, from a small blue planet on the edge of the galaxy, but they had become a promise that belonged to everyone. Leave no one behind. And the galaxy was never quite the same. Some say it was warmer after that, though scientists insisted that the temperature of space remained unchanged. But those who knew the truth understood that warmth does not always come from stars. Sometimes it comes from the hearts of those brave enough to care, stubborn enough to hope, and human enough to refuse to give up on anyone. Marcus Cole lived to see the Cole Doctrine save thousands of lives across hundreds of worlds. He walked with a cane for the rest of his days, a reminder of the price he had paid and the gift he had given. And whenever anyone asked him about his sacrifice, he would smile and shake his head. It was not a sacrifice, he would say. It was an honor. And somewhere in the stars, Vathra Colsen would nod in agreement, proud to call him brother.